I stared at my suitcase sitting on the concrete floor of our family garage, surrounded by dusty boxes and old sporting equipment. After 12 years of putting my family first, sacrificing my dreams, and contributing over 70% of my salary to our household, they decided I was worth less than the guest who would be staying for just 3 months. What they didn't know was that I had been keeping a secret, one that would change everything when they finally pushed me too far. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The garage light flickered overhead as I attempted to make the cot somewhat comfortable, laying down the extra blankets I'd managed to grab before being unceremoniously relocated from my bedroom. The space heater hummed weakly against the December chill that seeped through the poorly insulated walls. Outside, Colorado snow was beginning to fall, promising temperatures well below freezing by morning. "This is just temporary, Hannah," my mother had insisted earlier that evening, not quite meeting my eyes as she helped me carry my bedding across our snow-dusted lawn. "Your sister's friend Olivia needs a proper room while she's staying with us for her internship. It's only for 3 months, and the garage has that little bathroom your father installed when he was going through his man cave phase." A bathroom, consisting of a toilet and sink crammed into what was essentially a closet, with no shower in sight. I'd be expected to come into the house to shower, but only during designated times that wouldn't inconvenience anyone else. At 32 years old, with a master's degree in architectural engineering and a successful career managing development projects, I found myself displaced by a 22-year-old intern I'd never even met, all because she was my younger sister, Melissa's friend. I sat on the edge of the cot, hugging myself against the cold, and wondered how I'd ended up here. The answer, of course, was a lifetime of small surrenders that had gradually eroded any semblance of boundaries between myself and my family's demands. It had started 12 years ago when my father lost his job during the economic downturn. I had just graduated with my bachelor's degree and landed an entry-level position at a respected firm. Initially, moving back home was supposed to be a temporary arrangement to help the family through a rough patch. I'd contribute to rent and utilities while saving for my own place. That rough patch somehow extended indefinitely. My mother stopped, working altogether, claiming stress-induced health issues. My father eventually found employment, but at significantly reduced pay. And Melissa, 8 years my junior, was positioned as the family's golden child, whose education and comfort took priority over everything else. What had begun as a reasonable $500 monthly contribution to household expenses gradually increased as various emergencies arose. My father's back surgery, my mother's dental work, Melissa's college tuition, new tires for the family car I rarely got to use. The list was endless, and before I realized it, I was effectively financing our household while still being treated like a child under my parents' authority. "You're so blessed to have such a good job," my mother would say whenever I expressed even the mildest resistance. "Not everyone can afford to help their family like you can. We've sacrificed so much for you over the years." The narrative was always the same. My ability to contribute was characterized as a blessing that obligated me to share, while my parents' and sisters' inability to support themselves was portrayed as unfortunate circumstances beyond their control. The fact that Melissa had chosen an expensive private university to study art history with uncertain job prospects was never questioned. The fact that my parents hadn't saved adequately for retirement despite decades of dual incomes was never examined. And I, the reliable one, the responsible one, the one who always came through, continued enabling their financial dependence while my own dreams, of travel, of my own home, of financial security, remained perpetually deferred. My phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Melissa. "Sorry about the room situation. Olivia is really grateful. Promise we'll make it up to you." I didn't respond. What could I say? That I resented being displaced in my own home, home I largely paid for but had no actual authority within? That I was hurt by how easily they had prioritized a stranger's comfort over mine? That after 12 years of putting my family first, I expected at least the basic dignity of having a proper bedroom? Another text came through, this one from my mother. Don't forget you have that breakfast meeting tomorrow. You should shower tonight since Melissa and Olivia need the bathroom in the morning to get ready for classes. This was the reality of my life, not just financially supporting my family, but constantly adjusting my own basic needs around their convenience. Even though my job paid the mortgage, my schedule was considered less important than my sister's classes or my mother's book club or my father's golf games. I set the phone down and opened my laptop. The email I'd been avoiding all day still sat in my inbox, subject line bold and unread. Offer of employment, Chief Development Officer, Singapore office. 2 months ago, on a business trip to Singapore, I had interviewed for a position that would advance my career significantly. International experience, substantially higher salary, and the opportunity to oversee major development projects across Southeast Asia. I had applied on a whim, never expecting to be selected, never truly believing I could actually leave my family. But now, sitting on a cot in a freezing garage while a stranger slept in my bed. The offer letter glowed on my screen like a lifeline. The position came with a housing allowance for a luxury apartment in downtown Singapore. The salary would more than double my current earnings. The benefits included international health insurance, annual flights home, and a substantial retirement contribution. It represented everything I had sacrificed for years: financial independence, career advancement, and the opportunity to build my own life instead of subsidizing everyone else's. I had kept the job offer secret, knowing the family would immediately mobilize to convince me to decline it. They would call me selfish for considering a move that prioritized my career over their needs. They would question how they could possibly manage without my financial support. They would remind me of all they had sacrificed for me over the years, as if my decade of bankrolling their lifestyle hadn't more than repaid any debt I owed. But as I sat shivering in the garage, something shifted inside me. The familiar guilt and sense of obligation receded, replaced by a clarity I hadn't experienced in years. This moment, being exiled to the garage so my sister's friend could have comfort, crystallized exactly how my family viewed me, as a resource to be utilized rather than a person with needs and dreams of her own. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. The job offer required a response by the end of the week. Accepting meant leaving in just 3 weeks, barely time to pack, much less navigate the emotional minefield that would erupt when I announced my decision. But sitting there in that cold garage, I finally understood that I would never be able to create proper boundaries while remaining physically present in my family's life. The patterns were too entrenched, the expectations too established. Real change would require physical distance and a complete reset of our relationship dynamics. With a deep breath, I clicked reply and began typing my acceptance of the position in Singapore. The sense of liberation that flooded through me was immediate and profound, like taking a full breath after years of shallow breathing. For the first time in over a decade, I was choosing myself. Tomorrow, I would begin gathering the necessary documentation for my work visa. I would contact a realtor about selling my car. I would open a separate bank account my family couldn't access. And when everything was in place, only then would I reveal my decision. Not as a point of negotiation, but as a fact already set, in motion. The garage might be cold, the cot uncomfortable, but I fell asleep that night with a warmth spreading through my chest that had nothing to do with the space heater. It was the warmth of reclaiming my own life, of refusing to be defined solely by my utility to others. It was the first night in 12 years that I slept as Hannah the person, not Hannah the provider. And despite the concrete floor beneath me and the chill in the air, it was the most restful sleep I'd had in years. Morning arrived with a thin layer of frost on the inside of the garage windows. I woke to the sound of my alarm at 5:30 a.m., a full hour earlier than usual to accommodate the new shower schedule my mother had implemented. The house was still dark and quiet as I tiptoed through the kitchen door, overnight bag in hand, careful not to wake anyone who might question why I needed to be inside so early. The hot water of the shower brought temporary relief from the cold, but couldn't wash away the bitter realization of just how accustomed I'd become to making myself smaller to accommodate others. How normal it had seemed, until now, to structure my life around my family's convenience rather than my own needs. As I dried my hair, I caught sight of my reflection in the steamy mirror. At 32, faint lines had begun to form around my eyes. Not laugh lines, but the kind that come from years of stress and accommodation. My shoulders hunched slightly forward, as if perpetually bracing for the next request, the next emergency, the next sacrifice I would be expected to make. "Who even are you anymore?" I whispered to my reflection. The woman staring back at me was a stranger, someone who had slowly surrendered her identity piece by piece until she'd become merely a function rather than a person. Hannah, the provider. Hannah, the reliable one. Hannah, the ATM. I straightened, my shoulders deliberately, conscious of physically reclaiming space even in this small way. Today would be different. Today was the first day of my reclamation. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. At my breakfast meeting, with clients, I found myself unusually focused and decisive. The knowledge that I had finally chosen a direction for myself, that I had claimed agency over my own future, infused my interactions with a confidence I hadn't felt in years. When the senior partner complimented my presentation, I accepted the praise without deflection or qualification, another small act of self-reclamation. During my lunch break, I visited a local bank branch and opened a new account under my name, only. For years, I had maintained a joint account with my parents for emergencies, which had somehow evolved into a direct deposit for my entire paycheck, with no questions asked about how the money was spent. Going forward, my salary would go to an account they couldn't access, couldn't monitor, couldn't deplete without my knowledge. Next, I contacted the HR department at my current firm to discuss the logistics of my departure. The conversation was easier than expected. International experience was highly valued, and they made it clear a position would be available should I ever decide to return. I also arranged for my remaining paychecks to be split, 70% to my new private account and 30% to the family account, enough to cover my share of household expenses for my final 3 weeks without leaving excess for additional emergencies to suddenly arise. By mid-afternoon, I had also emailed a realtor about selling my car and contacted a shipping company about transporting my essential possessions to Singapore. Each practical step reinforced my commitment and made the abstract concept of leaving increasingly concrete. When I returned home that evening, I found my mother and Melissa in the kitchen with Olivia, the friend whose comfort had been prioritized over mine. She was tall and stylish, with the confident demeanor of someone who had never questioned her right to occupy space. "Hannah," my mother exclaimed with manufactured enthusiasm. "Come meet Olivia. She's so grateful for your generosity with the, room situation." Olivia offered a practiced smile. "Your family has been amazing, letting me stay here during my internship. The bedroom is perfect. I hope you don't mind that I moved some of your things to make space for my meditation corner." Before I could respond, Melissa jumped in. "I told her you wouldn't mind. You're always so understanding about these things." The old Hannah would have smiled and nodded, swallowing any objection to maintain harmony. The old Hannah would have reassured everyone that her discomfort was no inconvenience at all. The old Hannah would have retreated to the garage without complaint. But I was no longer that person. "Actually," I said calmly, "I do mind. I wasn't consulted about rearranging." my personal belongings. In the future, please ask before touching my things. The kitchen fell silent. My mother's smile froze in place while Melissa's eyes widened in shock. Olivia shifted uncomfortably, suddenly finding the floor fascinating. "Hannah," my mother finally said, her voice dropping to the quiet, disappointed tone she used when I failed to meet expectations. "Olivia is our guest. There's no need to make her feel unwelcome over such a small thing." "I'm not making anyone feel unwelcome," I replied, maintaining the same calm tone. "I'm establishing a basic boundary about my personal property. If that creates discomfort, perhaps we should reconsider the current arrangement." Melissa let out an exasperated sigh. "Why are you being so difficult? It's just some books and photographs. It's not like she threw them away." "It's not about the objects," I explained. "It's about respect. I've contributed to this household financially for 12 years. I've accommodated countless requests without complaint. I've postponed my own goals to support everyone else's. The least I deserve is to have my personal space and belongings treated with basic consideration." My mother's expression shifted, from disappointment to alarm as she realized this was not a minor disagreement, but something deeper. "Hannah, maybe we should discuss this privately. Olivia doesn't need to be involved in family matters." "This isn't a family matter," I countered. "This is about my dignity. And since Olivia is directly involved in the situation, she should understand the context." I turned to Olivia, whose discomfort was now palpable. "I'm sure you're a lovely person, and none of this is your fault. But you should know that I'm not sleeping in the garage because I volunteered. I'm there because my needs were deemed less important than yours, despite the fact that I pay most of the bills in this house. That's the kind of generosity you're benefiting from." The silence that followed was deafening. My mother appeared physically pained, while Melissa radiated indignation. Olivia looked like she wanted the floor to swallow her whole. "I didn't know," Olivia finally said quietly. "They told me you had offered to give up your room." Of course they had. The family narrative always portrayed every sacrifice I made as voluntary, every financial contribution as offered freely from abundance rather than extracted through guilt and obligation. "I'm going to change," I said, heading toward the stairs to my former bedroom. "I need to get some of my clothes." "Hannah, wait," my mother called after me, but I continued upstairs without acknowledging her. In my bedroom, now Olivia's, I found my belongings had indeed been rearranged. My photographs had been removed from the dresser, my books relocated to make space for crystals and incense holders. The room smelled of patchouli and unfamiliarity. As I gathered clothes from my closet, my phone buzzed with a text from my boss confirming the timeline for my transition. 3 weeks, and I would be on a plane to Singapore. 3 weeks to untangle 12 years of financial codependence. 3 weeks to reclaim my independence. The thought both terrified and exhilarated me. When I returned downstairs with an armful of clothes, I found my father had arrived home from work. The kitchen had transformed into what appeared to be a family meeting, with my parents and Melissa huddled at the table, speaking in hushed tones that abruptly ceased when I entered. "Hannah," my father began in his reasonable voice, the one he used when trying to convince me to fund another family expense. "Your mother tells me you're upset about the room situation. We thought we had discussed this." "No," I corrected him. "You informed me of your decision. There was no discussion." "Well," he continued undeterred, "we've been talking, and we think we might have been hasty. Olivia says she'd be willing to take the guest room in the basement instead. It would be a bit of an inconvenience with her allergies to dust, but if it's that important to you." The offer should have felt like a victory, but I recognized it for what it was, a tactical retreat intended to pacify me without addressing the underlying dynamic. They weren't acknowledging my right to dignity or recognizing the fundamental imbalance in our relationship. They were simply trying to neutralize my rebellion with the minimum possible concession. It's not about the room, I said, echoing my earlier statement to emphasize the point. It's about respect. It's about recognizing that I am an adult who deserves consideration, not a resource to be allocated according to everyone else's convenience. No one thinks of you as a resource, my mother protested, though her eyes couldn't quite meet mine. You're our daughter. We love you. We just thought, since you're so capable and stable, that you would be the most adaptable to the situation. And that's the problem, I replied. My capability and stability have become excuses to expect endless accommodation from me while requiring none from anyone else. That ends now. I turned and walked toward the garage door, my arms full of clothes, leaving my family in stunned silence. For the first time in over a decade, I had spoken my truth without cushioning it to protect their feelings. It felt foreign, yet liberating, like exercising a muscle long neglected, but finally remembering its strength. In the garage, I carefully hung my clothes on a makeshift rack I'd created from an old clothing rod. The space was still cold, still uncomfortable, still fundamentally unsuitable as a bedroom. But somehow, it felt different now. It was no longer a symbol of my subjugation, but a temporary way station on my journey to freedom. As I organized my belongings, I caught sight of a small wooden box tucked among my things, a keepsake container. My grandmother had given me before she passed. Inside were mementos I'd collected over the years, a sketch of the sustainable housing complex I'd dreamed of designing, postcards from places I'd planned to visit, a brochure from a master's program. In Singapore, I'd considered applying to years ago, but abandoned when my father needed knee surgery the same year. Each item represented a dream deferred, a path not taken because family needs had always taken precedence, until now. Until this moment of clarity in a cold garage that had finally shown me just how much I had surrendered. I placed the Singapore job offer letter inside the box alongside these artifacts of abandoned aspirations. But, unlike the others, this one would not remain a mere possibility. This one would become reality. Tomorrow would bring more confrontations, more boundaries, to establish more difficult conversations. But tonight, I slept with the certainty that my life was finally my own again, and no one could take that away unless I allowed it. The next morning, I woke with purpose. While my family slept, I used the early hours to begin a task I should have undertaken years ago, creating a comprehensive record of my financial contributions to the household. Though I had always kept receipts and bank statements, I had never compiled them into a single document that would clearly illustrate the scale of my support. At the kitchen table with my laptop, I methodically entered data from bank transfers, bill payments, and major purchases dating back 12 years. The pattern emerged with stark clarity. What had begun as reasonable contributions toward household expenses had gradually expanded into financing nearly every aspect of my family's lifestyle, the mortgage payments I had taken over when my father's hours were cut, the full coverage of utilities after my mother claimed they were too stressful to manage, Melissa's tuition payments, housing allowance, textbooks, and the emergency credit card I maintained for her that somehow always reached its limit, my parents' car payments, insurance, and maintenance costs, vacations I had funded but often couldn't join due to work responsibilities, home renovations that everyone else had input on except me. When I totaled the figures, the sum took my breath away, $387,942. Nearly $400,000 over 12 years, above and beyond my fair share of living expenses. Money that could have purchased my own home, funded my dream of starting a sustainable architecture firm, or simply remained as savings for my future. Instead, it had evaporated into maintaining my family's comfortable lifestyle while I slept, in a garage. As I stared at the number, footsteps sounded on the stairs. My father appeared in the kitchen doorway, already dressed for his part-time job at the local hardware store, a position he had deemed sufficient despite being physically capable of full-time work. "You're up early," he observed, heading for the coffee maker. I've been going through some financial records, I replied, keeping my tone neutral. Getting things organized before I make some changes. He glanced at my laptop screen, his expression sharpening with interest. What kind of changes? Personal financial adjustments, I said. Nothing for you to worry about. His casualness evaporated. If it affects household finances, it concerns all of us. The word all struck me as particularly ironic, given how financial decisions had actually worked in our family. Major purchases made without my input, my sister's educational expenses presented as non-negotiable, and leisure expenditures approved. By everyone except the person funding them. That's actually what I want to discuss with everyone, I said. I'd like to have a family meeting tonight. There are some things we need to talk about. My father's face clouded with suspicion. What things? Financial matters, I said simply, and my plans for the future. Before he could press further, I closed my laptop and stood. I need to prepare for work. I'll be home for dinner at 6. We can talk then. Throughout the day at work, I finalized details for my international move. I arranged for my retirement accounts to be transferred, initiated the process for an international driver's license, and confirmed my start date with the Singapore office. Each completed task strengthened my resolve for the conversation ahead. When I returned home that evening, the atmosphere was tense. My mother had prepared my favorite meal, a transparent attempt to soften whatever blow she sensed was coming. Melissa and Olivia were noticeably absent. "Where's Melissa?" I asked as I set my bag down. "She and Olivia went to study at the library," my mother replied, avoiding my eyes. "They mentioned something about the house being too tense to concentrate." Translation: Melissa had fled to avoid confrontation, a pattern established since childhood. Whenever difficult conversations loomed, she would conveniently disappear, leaving our parents to manage the situation and later briefing her on how to approach me once the worst had passed. "That's unfortunate," I said. "This conversation concerns her, too." "What exactly is this about, Hannah?" my father asked impatiently. "Your mother's been worried all day." I took a seat at the table and opened my laptop. I want to discuss my financial contributions to this household, both past and future. "If this is still about the bedroom situation," my mother began. "It's not," I interrupted firmly. "The bedroom was merely a symptom of a larger problem." I turned my laptop so they could see the spreadsheet I had created. "This is a record of my financial contributions to this family over the past 12 years, beyond my fair share of living expenses as an adult child. The total is nearly $400,000. My parents stared at the screen in silence. The detailed accounting of transfers, payments, and purchases told a story they couldn't dismiss. The story of systematic financial dependence disguised as family support. "No one forced you to help us," my father finally said, his tone defensive. "You offered." "Did I?" I challenged. "Or was I conditioned to believe that my income was a family resource? That my success obligated me to compensate for everyone else's financial choices? That saying no would make me selfish and ungrateful?" My mother's eyes filled with tears. "We never intended to take advantage of you, Hannah. Things were difficult. After your father lost his job, and then it just became our normal." "I understand that," I said, softening my tone slightly. "I'm not saying you deliberately exploited me, but intentions aside, the result is the same. I've spent 12 years prioritizing everyone's needs above my own, and it's taken sleeping in a garage to make me realize how unbalanced things have become." "What exactly are you saying?" my father asked, wariness evident in his voice. I took a deep breath. "I'm saying several things. First, I'm significantly reducing my financial contributions to this household, effective immediately. I'll continue to pay my fair share of expenses as long as I'm living here, but I will no longer subsidize lifestyle choices or discretionary spending for the rest of the family. My parents exchanged alarmed glances. Second, I continued, I've accepted a position as Chief Development Officer with my company's Singapore office. I'll be leaving in 3 weeks. The silence that followed was absolute. My mother's face drained of color, while my father's features hardened into a mask of disbelief. Singapore? My mother finally whispered. But that's on the other side of the world. It is, I confirmed. It's an incredible opportunity, one I've earned through years of hard work and sacrifice. But what about us? My father demanded. What about your responsibilities here? The question crystallized exactly what I had come to realize during my night in the garage. My family viewed my primary value through the lens of what I could provide, rather than who I was as a person. My only responsibility, I said carefully, is to myself. I'm 32 years old. I've supported this family financially for over a decade. I've postponed my own goals and dreams to maintain everyone else's comfort. It's time for me to prioritize my own life. This is incredibly selfish, my father said, anger replacing shock. After everything we've done for you? What exactly? Have you done for me in the past 12 years? I asked, keeping my voice level despite the surge of emotion. I've paid the mortgage on this house. I've covered utilities, groceries, and major repairs. I've funded Melissa's education and your lifestyle choices. I've done this while being treated as a secondary consideration in my own home, to the point where I'm now sleeping in an unheated garage while a stranger occupies my bedroom. I gestured to the spreadsheet still displayed on my laptop. If we're talking about debts owed, I believe mine has been more than paid. My mother began to cry in earnest now, using tears as she always had, as a means to soften confrontation and redirect from accountability to comfort. In the past, I would have immediately backed down, apologized for causing distress, and compromised my position to restore peace. Not today. I understand this is upsetting, I said, maintaining my composure. Change is difficult, especially when it affects financial security. But this change is necessary for all of us. You both need to establish independence from my income. Melissa needs to take responsibility for her own financial choices, and I need to build the life I've put on hold for far too long. How are we supposed to manage? My father demanded. The mortgage alone? You have options, I replied. You could sell this house and downsize to something more affordable. Dad could increase his hours at the hardware store or find full-time employment. Mom could return to work. Melissa could get a part-time job while studying, as most college students do. You could rent out rooms to actual paying tenants rather than hosting your daughter's friends for free. I closed my laptop. The solutions exist. They simply require adjustment to a lifestyle aligned with your actual income rather than relying on mine. I can't believe what I'm hearing, my father said, standing abruptly. After everything, we've sacrificed for you. What exactly did you sacrifice? I asked, genuinely curious about his perspective. Please help me understand what you've given up for my benefit in recent years. He opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again, unable to formulate a specific answer. We gave you a home, my mother offered weakly. A home I've been paying for, I corrected gently. I'm not denying that you raised me, educated me, and supported me through my childhood and early adulthood. I'm grateful for that foundation. But at some point, the parent-child relationship should evolve into one of mutual respect between adults. That hasn't happened here. I stood, gathering my laptop. I've already adjusted my direct deposits so that only my fair share of household expenses will go into our joint account until I leave. The rest will fund my relocation and new life in Singapore. I've prepared a breakdown of exactly what I'll continue covering during these 3 weeks so you can begin planning accordingly. I placed a printed document on the table, another meticulously prepared spreadsheet showing the reduced contributions and which expenses they covered. "This is really happening," my mother said, staring at the paper. "You're actually leaving us." "I'm not leaving you," I clarified. "I'm choosing myself for the first time in my adult life. There's a difference." As I turned to head back to my temporary garage bedroom, my father called after me. "What about Melissa? Have you thought about how this will affect her education? Her future?" The question was so perfectly illustrative of the family dynamic that I almost laughed. Even now, facing significant financial restructuring, their primary concern was for my sister rather than acknowledging my needs or the legitimacy of my decision. "Melissa is 24 years old," I replied without turning back. "Her education and future are her responsibility, not mine. Just as my life is my responsibility, not yours." In the garage that night, I felt lighter despite the weight of the confrontation. Speaking my truth had been difficult but necessary, the first step in reclaiming not just financial independence but personal authority. I had expected to feel guilty, to be plagued by second thoughts and anxiety about the welfare of my family. Instead, I felt clear, resolved, certain in a way I hadn't experienced in years. My phone buzzed repeatedly with texts from Melissa, who had apparently returned home to find our parents in distress. "What did you do?" Mom's crying and Dad's furious. "How could you spring this on everyone with no warning?" "Singapore? Are you trying to hurt this family? Please tell me you're not serious about cutting us off financially." I considered responding, but realized any explanation would be met with the same emotional manipulation that had kept me compliant for years. Instead, I silenced my phone and returned to reviewing the shipping quotes for my belongings. My family would need to process this change in their own way, just as I was processing my emerging independence. For the first time, their emotional reactions were not my responsibility to manage. Their financial future was not my burden to secure. Their comfort was not my priority to maintain at the expense of my own. In the cold of the garage, surrounded by the physical manifestation of my family's disregard for my needs, I felt the warm certainty of knowing I had finally chosen myself. In 3 weeks, I would board a plane to Singapore, leaving behind not just this house, but the version of myself who had allowed her worth to be defined by her utility to others. The journey ahead would be challenging, the emotions complex, the adjustments significant. But as I looked at the acceptance letter from the Singapore office, I knew with absolute clarity that I was moving toward, rather than running away, toward self-respect, toward authentic relationships, toward a life designed around my own dreams rather than others' expectations. For the first time in 12 years, I was truly coming home to myself. By morning, the family's shock had transformed into a coordinated strategy. I recognized the pattern immediately. I had witnessed it countless times when Melissa faced consequences for her actions or when my parents encountered financial boundaries from other relatives. First came disbelief, then anger, followed by a carefully orchestrated campaign to restore the status quo. I arrived home from work to find my mother cooking an elaborate dinner, my favorite foods arranged as a peace offering. The dining room table was set with the good china reserved for special occasions, and fresh flowers stood as a centerpiece. The garage door had been mysteriously jammed all day, requiring me to enter through the main house where this display awaited. "Hannah, perfect timing," my mother called with manufactured cheerfulness. "Dinner's almost ready. I made your favorites, herb-crusted salmon, roasted asparagus, and that wild rice pilaf you love." My father emerged from his study, a folder tucked under his arm, his expression carefully composed into one of paternal concern rather than the anger that had dominated last night's conversation. "Join us for dinner," he said, gesturing to the table. "We'd like to discuss things calmly, as a family. Melissa sat already seated, her expression a practiced blend of contrition and appeal. Beside her chair rested a gift bag with tissue paper protruding from the top, another classic tactic from the family playbook. When reason failed, sentiment became the weapon of choice. "Where's Olivia?" I asked, noting her absence. "She's staying with a classmate for a few days," Melissa replied, not quite meeting my eyes. "We thought it would be good to have some family time without complications." Translation: they had temporarily removed the most visible symbol of my displacement to make it easier to convince me to reconsider my decision. The garage bedroom situation would be resolved just long enough to secure my financial recommitment, then conveniently reinstated once my departure plans were abandoned. I recognized each element of the scene for what it was: a carefully constructed appeal to the emotional triggers that had kept me compliant for years. The familiar foods designed to evoke childhood comfort. The formal setting suggesting momentous family unity. The conspicuous absence of outside witnesses to whatever manipulation would follow. In the past, such efforts would have worked seamlessly. The desire for harmony would override my boundaries. The fear of disappointing my family would eclipse my own needs. The guilt of prioritizing myself would drive me back into the role of provider and peacekeeper, but that version of Hannah no longer existed. "I appreciate the effort," I said, setting my bag down, "but I have plans this evening. I'm meeting with my realtor about selling my car." My mother's carefully maintained smile faltered. "Surely that can wait. This is important, Hannah. We need to talk as a family." "We talked yesterday," I replied calmly. "I made my position clear. Unless you're ready to discuss how you'll manage independently after I leave, I'm not sure what else there is to say." "That's exactly what we want to discuss," my father interjected, pulling out a chair. "We've been working on some figures today, some alternative proposals." The folder in his hand suddenly made sense, a counteroffer to my declaration of independence. Having realized that emotional appeals alone might prove insufficient, they had prepared a more strategic approach. Against my better judgment, curiosity won out. "What kind of proposals?" "Sit," my father said, sliding into business negotiation mode, the same tone he had used years ago when convincing clients to invest in his insurance packages before the economy collapsed. "Just hear us out." I remained standing. "I can listen for a few minutes, but my appointment is at 7. My father opened the folder, revealing spreadsheets similar to my own, but with different calculations. "We've reviewed your figures, and while we don't dispute your contributions, we think you've overlooked certain factors." He slid the first page toward me. A detailed accounting of expenses they claim to have incurred on my behalf over the years, including proportional housing costs during your childhood and college years, educational investments including private school tuition, healthcare expenses through age 26, transportation costs before you had your own vehicle, value of home-cooked meals, laundry services, and household management. The bottom line was circled in red, $412,376. "As you can see," my father continued, "when accounting for everything we've invested in you, the financial balance actually tips in our favor." The audacity was breathtaking. They had monetized baseline parental responsibilities, feeding, housing, and educating their child, and presented them as debts I still owed, despite having functionally supported the household for 12 years as an adult. "This is interesting. Accounting," I said, keeping my voice neutral despite the anger building inside me. "But it operates on a fundamental misunderstanding of parent-child relationships. You chose to have children. The expenses associated with raising those children were your responsibility, not debts to be repaid later." "Family isn't about keeping score," my mother interjected, apparently missing the irony given the detailed ledger before us. "Exactly," I agreed. "Yet that's precisely what this document attempts to do: quantify parental obligations as if they were loans requiring repayment. By that logic, I should expect Melissa to reimburse me for her education once she's employed. Melissa shifted uncomfortably, the implication clearly disturbing her sense of entitlement to family support. That's different, my father argued. Supporting siblings is part of family responsibility. Where exactly is that written? I asked. And why does that responsibility fall exclusively on me while Melissa contributes nothing to household expenses despite being an adult? My father ignored the question, flipping to the next page in his folder. We've prepared some alternatives to your Singapore plan. Option 1. You maintain your current financial contributions but move back into your bedroom. We'll find another arrangement for Olivia. He turned another page. Option 2. You reduce your contributions by 25% but remain local, perhaps finding your own apartment nearby so you can still participate in family life while having your own space. Another page turn. Option 3. If you're truly set on advancing your career, we've researched positions in Denver that would provide similar opportunities without requiring international relocation. Each option had been meticulously researched and presented with accompanying financial projections, timelines, and family impact assessments. The amount of effort that had gone into these countermeasures within 24 hours was remarkable, far more consideration than they had ever given to my original needs or aspirations. You misunderstand the situation, I said, stepping back from the table. This isn't a negotiation. I'm not presenting terms for you to counter. I'm informing you of decisions I've already made about my own life. But have you really thought this through? My mother pressed. Singapore is so far away. The cultural differences, the distance from family support. What if something goes wrong? What if you get sick or need help? I've secured comprehensive international health insurance, I replied. The company provides relocation assistance and cultural integration resources. I'll have a professional network through work, and technology makes staying connected with family quite manageable. It just seems so extreme, Melissa finally spoke up, her voice small. We know things haven't been perfect, but cutting us off financially and moving across the world, couldn't we find a middle ground? The gift bag beside her chair suddenly seemed pathetic rather than manipulative, a token gesture against the magnitude of what was happening. For the first time, I felt genuine compassion for my sister, who had been raised within the same dysfunctional system but positioned as its beneficiary rather than its supporter. This isn't about punishing anyone, I explained, softening my tone. It's about creating necessary change. The current dynamic isn't healthy for any of us. You've been denied the opportunity to develop financial independence and self-sufficiency. Mom and Dad have been shielded from the consequences of their financial choices. And I've sacrificed my own dreams to maintain a system that ultimately serves none of us well. But we're family, my mother insisted, tears welling in her eyes. We're supposed to support each other. Support should be reciprocal, I replied. It should nurture growth rather than dependence. It should celebrate individual achievement rather than exploit it. What we've been doing isn't support, it's subsistence, and it's preventing all of us from reaching our potential. My father's business facade cracked, revealing the fear beneath. The mortgage payment is due next week. Without your contribution, you have options, I reminded him. The same options I presented yesterday. They're not easy or comfortable, but they're necessary. I checked my watch. I need to leave for my appointment now. I suggest you use this time to explore those options rather than devising more strategies to maintain the status quo. As I turned to go, Melissa called after me. Wait, you didn't even open your gift. I paused, considering the small bag with its colorful tissue paper. Whatever lay inside represented yet another attempt to appeal to sentiment over substance, to emotional attachment over legitimate needs. Keep it, I said gently. This isn't a situation that can be resolved with gifts. As I drove to meet my realtor, I reflected on how differently the confrontation had unfolded compared to what would have happened just days ago. The elaborate dinner, the financial counterproposal, the strategic gift, all tactics that had reliably worked in the past to pull me back into compliance, had bounced off the new boundaries I was establishing. The realization was both empowering and sobering. I had spent years believing I couldn't extricate myself from family financial obligations, that my responsibility was immutable and non-negotiable. Yet, when I finally claimed the authority to make different choices, their power to control my decisions evaporated almost immediately. The most profound prison, it seemed, had always been in my own mind. That evening, as I arranged my makeshift bedroom in the garage, a text arrived from Melissa. "Can we talk? Just the two of us. Please." I considered declining, but realized that of all my family members, Melissa was the least culpable for the dysfunctional system we had created. She had been a teenager when I began supporting the family and had simply grown into the role designed for her, the one whose dreams deserved investment, whose needs took priority, whose future held promise requiring cultivation. "Tomorrow after work," I replied. "We can meet at Riverside Cafe at 6. Her response came immediately. "Thank you, I'll be there." As I prepared for bed, I noticed the temperature in the garage had dropped significantly. The space heater struggled against the deepening winter chill, its feeble warmth barely reaching the cot. Yet despite the physical discomfort, I felt an inner warmth that no external condition could diminish, the warmth of integrity, of alignment between values and actions, of choices made from self-respect rather than obligation. In just 20 days, I would board a plane to Singapore. In 20 days, I would begin building a life defined by possibility rather than duty, by authenticity rather than accommodation. The path ahead would undoubtedly hold challenges: cultural adjustments, professional pressures, the genuine grief of geographic separation from family despite the dysfunction. But for the first time in 12 years, those challenges would be mine to navigate on my own terms, guided by my own values, in service to my own vision for my life. And that knowledge made even a freezing garage feel like the threshold to freedom. Riverside Cafe sat nestled along the banks of the Thompson River, its large windows offering expansive views of the water and mountains beyond. I arrived early, selecting a corner table that provided both privacy and a clear view of the entrance. The cafe had been a favorite study spot during my college years, a place where I'd spent countless hours designing sustainable structures, while working part-time to fund my education before family obligations consumed my financial resources. When Melissa entered, I was struck by how young she looked despite being 24. Her expression carried an unusual vulnerability, lacking the confident entitlement that typically characterized her presence in family settings. She spotted me and approached hesitantly, as if unsure of her welcome. "Thanks for meeting me," she said, sliding into the chair opposite mine. "Of course," I replied, pushing a cup toward her. "I ordered your usual hazelnut latte with oat milk." Surprise flickered across her face. "You remembered." "Just because I'm establishing boundaries doesn't mean I don't know or care about you, Melissa." She wrapped her hands around the cup, staring into the foam rather than meeting my eyes. "Mom and Dad are freaking out. Dad spent all day calling relatives trying to secure loans. Mom's been researching second jobs. It's like the apocalypse at home." "They're experiencing the natural consequences of financial dependence," I said, not unkindly. "It's uncomfortable but necessary." "They're saying you've abandoned the family," she continued. "That you've changed, become selfish." "What do you think?" I asked. The question seemed to catch her off guard. "I don't know. Everything's happening so fast. One day you're just my dependable big sister who handles all the money stuff, and the next you're moving to Singapore and cutting everyone off." "It may seem sudden to you," I acknowledged, "but this has been building for years. I've just been swallowing my resentment, convincing myself that family obligation justified postponing my own life indefinitely. Was it really that bad? Melissa asked, finally looking up. Living with us? Helping out? The genuine confusion in her voice revealed how differently we had experienced the same household. What I had perceived as systematic exploitation, she had seen as normal family support. Melissa, I haven't taken a vacation in 6 years because any extra money went to family expenses. I drive a 10-year-old car while funding the lease on Dad's SUV. I've been sleeping in an unheated garage so your friend could have my bedroom. Yes, it was that bad. Not because of any single incident, but because of the accumulated pattern of being valued primarily for what I provide rather than who I am. She flinched at the concrete examples. I never thought about it that way. You always seemed fine with everything, so I assumed you were. That's because I was conditioned to believe that expressing my own needs was selfish, I explained. That being a good daughter and sister meant setting aside my aspirations to ensure everyone else's comfort. It took sleeping in a garage to finally wake me up to how unbalanced things had become. Melissa stirred her latte, processing this perspective. So this Singapore job, is it really an amazing opportunity, or are you just trying to get away from us? Both, I admitted candidly. It's genuinely a career-defining position with international exposure, higher compensation, and projects aligned with my values in sustainable development. But I also recognized that I couldn't create healthy boundaries while remaining physically present in a system designed to exploit my sense of responsibility. And the financial stuff? You're really just stopping after all these years? I'm stopping the enabling, I clarified. I've essentially been funding an artificial lifestyle that none of you could maintain independently. That hasn't been helpful to anyone in the long run. Dad has no incentive to seek full-time work. Mom hasn't developed any skills to re-enter the workforce. And you. I paused, considering how to frame this delicately. And I've been allowed to drift through expensive education without developing any practical skills or financial independence. Melissa completed the thought, surprising me with her self-awareness. Essentially, yes. She sighed, pushing her hair back from her face, a gesture reminiscent of our mother. I never asked for any of this, you know. I didn't demand that you pay my tuition or cover my expenses. You didn't have to, I replied. The system was established before you were old enough to recognize it. You were assigned the role of family talent worthy of investment, while I was assigned the role of family provider. Neither of us chose these positions, but we both internalized them. So what am I supposed to do now? She asked, a note of panic entering her voice. My tuition payment for next semester is due in 3 weeks. I don't have a job. I've never even had a real job. For the first time, I saw my sister not as the entitled beneficiary of my sacrifice, but as another victim of our family's dysfunctional system. Someone who had been denied the opportunity to develop self-sufficiency and resilience because it hadn't served the family narrative. There are options, I said, softening my approach. You could apply for student loans like most people pursuing higher education. You could get a part-time job. The university is always hiring for administrative positions with flexible hours. You could take a semester off to work full-time and save up. You could look into scholarships that might still be available. None of those sound as easy as having you pay for everything, Melissa said with a weak attempt at humor. Easy? No. But necessary and ultimately beneficial? Absolutely. She was quiet for a moment, absently tracing the rim of her cup. So, Singapore, tell me about this job. What will you be doing that's so important you have to move across the world? The question could have been interpreted as passive-aggressive, but I sensed genuine curiosity beneath it. For perhaps the first time in our adult relationship, Melissa was showing interest in my life without an underlying agenda. I'll be overseeing sustainable development projects across Southeast Asia, I explained, unable to keep the enthusiasm from my voice. The firm is partnering with governments and NGOs to design climate-resilient housing and infrastructure for communities vulnerable to rising sea levels and extreme weather events. It's the kind of work I dreamed of doing when I first chose architecture, creating solutions that address both human needs and environmental challenges. As I described the projects, Melissa's expression shifted from polite interest to genuine engagement. "That actually sounds amazing," she admitted. "I had no idea you were into that kind of work. I always thought you just did boring corporate buildings or something." "Because we never really talk about my interests or aspirations," I pointed out. "Our family conversations revolve around everyone else's needs, goals, and activities." "When was the last time anyone asked me about my work beyond how much I was earning?" She winced. "I can't remember." "Exactly." "So when do you leave?" she asked after another silence. 19 days. My flight is on the 15th. "That's so soon." She hesitated before asking, "Will you come back to visit?" "Eventually," I said honestly. "But not immediately. I need time and distance to establish new patterns in our relationship. Patterns based on mutual respect rather than financial dependence." Melissa nodded slowly, then surprised me by reaching across the table to take my hand. "I'm sorry, Hannah. I didn't see what was happening because it benefited me not to see it. And I'm sorry about the bedroom thing with Olivia. That was especially thoughtless." The apology, unexpected and seemingly genuine, caught me off guard. I had prepared for manipulation, defensiveness, or guilt-inducing tactics, not sincere acknowledgement of wrongdoing. "Thank you for saying that," I replied, squeezing her hand briefly before withdrawing mine. "That means a lot." "So what happens now, with us, I mean?" "That depends partly on you," I said. "I'd like to have a relationship with my sister, one based on mutual respect and genuine connection rather than financial obligation. But that requires both of us to relate differently than we have been." "I don't even know where to start," she admitted. "You could start by getting to know me as a person rather than a resource," I suggested. "Ask questions about my interests, my values, my hopes, the way you would with a friend you're genuinely curious about, and I'll do the same for you." "I'd like that," she said softly. As the conversation continued, we ventured into territory previously unexplored, discussing books we'd both enjoyed, sharing perspectives on climate policy, debating the merits of various architectural styles. I discovered that beneath the entitled persona she presented at home, Melissa possessed genuine intelligence and insight. She had simply never been expected to develop these qualities in a family system that valued her potential more than her actual contributions. When we finally parted 3 hours later, something had subtly shifted between us. The dynamic wasn't completely transformed. Years of established patterns couldn't dissolve in a single conversation, but a foundation for something healthier had been laid. "I'm going to look into campus jobs tomorrow," Melissa said as we walked to our cars, "and I've decided to tell Olivia to find different accommodations for the rest of her internship. The basement room would be fine for her if she actually paid rent, but not as a free arrangement that displaces you." The declaration, while modest, represented a significant step toward personal responsibility, one I wouldn't have expected from the sister who had benefited most from my financial support. "That sounds like a good start," I said, genuinely proud of her initiative. Before getting into her car, a car I had helped finance, Melissa turned back to me. "Hannah, do you think I could visit you in Singapore someday? Once I've, figured some things out and can pay my own way?" The question contained within it a vision of our future relationship, one where connection wasn't predicated on proximity or financial support, but on mutual respect and genuine desire for each other's company. "I'd like that very much," I replied, meaning it completely. As I drove back to the house that had ceased to feel like home, I reflected on how differently the conversation had unfolded from my expectations. I had anticipated defensiveness, manipulation, perhaps even hostility, the strategies typically deployed within our family to maintain the status quo. Instead, I had glimpsed the potential for authentic relationship with my sister once the distorting influence of financial dependence was removed. It occurred to me that perhaps the greatest gift I could offer my family wasn't continued financial support, but the opportunity to discover their own resilience and capabilities, to develop the self-sufficiency that my enabling had inadvertently prevented. By withdrawing the financial safety net that had become a restrictive web, I was creating space for genuine growth and transformation. The garage awaited me, still cold, still uncomfortable, still a physical manifestation of my family's priorities. But it no longer felt like a punishment or symbol of my exploitation. Instead, it had become a temporary way station on my journey toward authentic living, a reminder of what I was leaving behind and the freedom that awaited. In 19 days, I would board a plane to Singapore to begin building a life aligned with my values and aspirations. But the real journey had already begun. The internal transformation from someone defined by utility to others to someone guided by authentic purpose and self-respect. That journey wouldn't end with geographical relocation. It would continue as I established new patterns of relating to myself and others based on mutual value rather than one-sided accommodation. As I settled onto the cot that night, I felt not resentment, but gratitude for the garage that had catalyzed my awakening. Sometimes, it takes finding yourself in an unacceptable situation to finally recognize what you truly deserve. 2 weeks after my conversation with Melissa, with just 5 days remaining before my departure for Singapore, an unexpected development altered the family dynamic completely. I had returned home from finalizing my visa application to find my father sitting at the kitchen table, uncharacteristically alone and subdued, a manila envelope placed before him. "Hannah," he said as I entered, his voice lacking its usual authoritative tone. "We need to talk." Over the past weeks, I had grown accustomed to talks that were actually thinly veiled attempts to manipulate me into changing my plans. Each family member had deployed their preferred strategy. My mother leveraged emotional appeals and tears. My father presented logical arguments about financial practicalities, and Melissa oscillated between newfound self-awareness and occasional regression into entitled expectations. "I have a conference call in 30 minutes, I replied, checking my watch. "Can this wait until later?" "No," he said firmly, pushing the envelope toward me. "This can't wait any longer. It's already waited too long." Something in his demeanor, a vulnerability I'd rarely witnessed in my confident, sometimes domineering father, gave me pause. I set down my bag and took the seat across from him. "What is this?" I asked, indicating the envelope. "Something I should have shown you years ago." He exhaled slowly. "Something that might help explain, though not excuse, how we ended up here." I opened the envelope cautiously, half expecting another creative accounting of alleged familial debts, or, perhaps, legal documents demanding continued financial support. Instead, I found medical records, dozens of pages of specialist consultations, diagnostic results, and treatment recommendations dating back 11 years. The patient name on each document was Robert Wells, my father. "I don't understand," I said, scanning the unfamiliar medical terminology. "What am I looking at?" "Early-onset Parkinson's disease," he said quietly. "Diagnosed shortly after I lost my position at the insurance firm. Initially mild, manageable with medication. Progressive, over time." I stared at him, reassessing the man before me through this new lens. The slight tremor in his left hand that I'd attributed to age. The occasional stiffness in his movements that seemed like typical middle-aged discomfort. The fatigue that I'd interpreted as laziness or lack of motivation to secure full-time employment. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked. my voice barely above a whisper. Pride, he admitted, the word seeming to physically pain him. Shame. Fear. Pick your poison. But Mom knows? He nodded. Your mother has known from the beginning. We decided to keep it private, to protect you kids from unnecessary worry. Protect us? I echoed incredulously. Dad, I've been supporting this family financially for over a decade while believing you were capable of full-time work, but simply unwilling. I've been harboring resentment, judging your choices, questioning your work ethic, all while you were dealing with a degenerative condition I knew nothing about. He winced at my words. I know, and that's on me, not you. I made the decision to hide this, and that decision created a false narrative that has damaged our relationship profoundly. I continued scanning the medical documents, noting the progression of symptoms documented across years of appointments, the adjustments to medication dosages, the recommendations for lifestyle modifications to manage the condition. These records show your doctor repeatedly advising employment accommodations, I observed. Modified schedules, reduced physical demands, stress management. Why not seek positions that could accommodate these needs rather than working part-time at the hardware store? The hardware store was one of the few places willing to hire someone with my condition without making it an issue, he explained. After the financial crisis, the insurance industry became particularly unforgiving of any perceived weakness. I applied for dozens of positions in my field, made it to final interviews, then watched opportunities disappear once I disclosed my medical situation. He ran a hand through his graying hair, a gesture of frustration I'd seen countless times, but now recognized as potentially symptomatic of his condition. The part-time position at the hardware store offered flexibility when symptoms flared, minimal physical demands, and basic health insurance. It was the best option available given my limitations. The revelation recontextualized years of family dynamics, casting our financial situation in a different light. What I had perceived as my father's lack of initiative was actually adaptation to progressive disability. His reluctance to pursue higher-paying positions wasn't laziness, but a pragmatic response to workplace discrimination he'd encountered. This changes things, I acknowledged, carefully returning the documents to the envelope. But it doesn't explain why you kept it from me all these years, especially as I took on more financial responsibility for the family. It should have been temporary, he said, regret evident in his voice. When you first offered to help after college, I genuinely believed I would find appropriate employment within months, that my condition would stabilize with the right medication, that your financial support would be brief, just until we regained our footing. He leaned forward, his expression earnest. But then months became years. Your contributions became essential rather than supplemental. And the longer I went without, telling you the truth, the harder it became to admit that I had allowed you to believe a lie about our situation. And Mom, why did she enable this deception? Your mother. He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. Your mother has her own challenges. The stress-induced health issues she cites aren't entirely fabricated, though perhaps not as debilitating as she sometimes presents. When I was diagnosed, she developed anxiety and depression that made employment difficult. Her conditions and mine created a perfect storm of financial vulnerability that you unknowingly stepped into. I sat back in my chair, attempting to process this reconfiguration of our family narrative. The anger and resentment I'd nursed for years, justified by what I'd perceived as exploitation, now required reevaluation in light of circumstances I hadn't known existed. I'm still trying to understand why you're telling me this now, I said finally. After all these years of secrecy, why reveal it 5 days before I leave for Singapore? My father's expression reflected genuine anguish. Because you deserve the truth before you go. Because letting you leave, believing your family had simply taken advantage of your generosity would be another inexcusable failure on my part. And because he faltered, then continued with visible effort. And because I need you to know that while I've failed in many ways as a father these past years, it wasn't through lack of trying or caring. My condition limited my options, but my pride prevented me from being honest about those limitations. I allowed you to believe the worst about me rather than reveal my weakness. The complexity of emotions flowing through me defied simple categorization. The revelation partially explained the financial burden I had carried, but didn't erase the fact that I had been kept in the dark while making significant sacrifices. It provided context for my father's employment choices, but didn't justify the family's collective entitlement to my resources. I appreciate you finally telling me this, I said carefully. It helps me understand certain aspects of our situation that never made sense. But I'm still processing what it means for everything that's happened. I'm not asking you to change your plans, he clarified, seeming to anticipate my thoughts. The Singapore position is an incredible opportunity you've earned through hard work and talent. You should absolutely go. I just couldn't let you leave believing your father had exploited your success out of laziness or selfishness. What about Melissa? I asked. Does she know? He shook his head. No, she was too young when I was diagnosed. And afterward, we maintained the fiction that everything was normal. Your mother and I didn't want her opportunities limited by family medical concerns. So once again, I was treated differently, trusted with family financial burdens, but not with the truth behind them. It wasn't about trust, he insisted. It was misguided protection that evolved into something unhealthy for everyone. By the time I realized how damaging the secrecy had become, patterns were established that seemed impossible to disrupt without causing greater harm. I considered his words, recognizing the complex interplay of good intentions, pride, fear, and flawed decision-making that had created our current reality. No villains, just imperfect people responding imperfectly to difficult circumstances. What happens now? I asked. Regardless of the reasons behind our financial situation, the practical reality remains the same. I'm leaving for Singapore, and my financial support is ending. We've been making arrangements, he replied, straightening his posture with a dignity I hadn't witnessed in years. Your mother has secured a part-time position at the library starting next week. I've increased my hours at the hardware store as much as my condition allows. We've listed the house for sale. It's too large and expensive for our needs anyway. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a folded check, placing it on the table between us. And this is for you. I unfolded the check and stared in disbelief. At the amount, $5,000. I don't understand, I said, looking up at him in confusion. It's partial repayment, he explained. A good faith beginning. Nowhere near what you've contributed over the years, but what we can manage right now. Once the house sells, we'll be able to return more. The gesture, though financially modest compared to what I had provided over the years, represented a profound shift in our relationship dynamic, an acknowledgement of debt rather than entitlement, responsibility rather than exploitation. This isn't necessary, I said, pushing the check back toward him. I didn't support the family all these years with expectation of repayment. I know, he replied, refusing to take the check. That's precisely why it is necessary. Your generosity was treated as obligation for too long. Accepting this is part of restoring the respect you deserve. As I held the check, a tangible symbol of shifting power dynamics within our family, I recognized that my father's revelation had accomplished something significant beyond explaining past behavior. It had disrupted the narrative of exploitation that had fueled my resentment, offering instead a more nuanced understanding of human frailty, pride, and the unintended consequences of choices made from fear rather than transparency. This new understanding didn't erase the years of sacrifice or justify the treatment I had received. It didn't change my decision to leave or establish independence. but it did offer the possibility of eventual reconciliation based on truth rather than continued deception, a foundation upon which a healthier relationship might someday be built. "I need time to process all this," I said, finally rising from the table. "It doesn't change my plans for Singapore, but it does change how I understand what's happened these past years." My father nodded, accepting my response without protest. "That's all I ask, that you go with a more complete picture, even if it's one that still includes my significant failures as a parent." As I turned to leave, he spoke again, his voice catching slightly. "Hannah? I'm proud of you. Not just for your professional success or financial contributions, but for having the courage to choose yourself when the rest of us didn't. That kind of strength, the kind that stands firm even against those you love, that's rare and valuable. Don't ever lose it." The words, perhaps the first unconditional affirmation I had received from my father in years, resonated with unexpected power. They acknowledged not just what I had done for the family, but who I was as a person, someone worthy of respect, independent of my utility to others. In the garage that evening, packing the last of my belongings for shipment to Singapore, I reflected on how dramatically my understanding of the family dynamic had shifted in a single conversation. The narrative I had constructed, of deliberate exploitation and entitlement, had been complicated by revelations of illness, pride, and misguided protection. The truth, as always, contained more nuance than my anger had allowed room for. My family had failed me in significant ways, but not necessarily for the reasons I had believed. Their actions, while damaging, had emerged from complex human vulnerabilities rather than simple selfishness. This realization didn't change my decision to leave or establish independence. If anything, it reinforced the necessity of breaking patterns established through years of secrecy and accommodation. But it did offer the possibility that the relationships left behind might eventually transform into something healthier. Connections, based on authentic understanding rather than financial dependence and unspoken expectations. As I carefully wrapped framed photographs for transport, images of family moments that held both genuine joy and complicated tensions, I recognized that true independence wasn't about severing connections, but transforming them. It wasn't about rejecting family, but redefining what family could mean when built on mutual respect rather than obligation. 5 days remained before my departure. 5 days to navigate this new understanding while maintaining the boundaries I had established. 5 days to begin the process of forgiveness, not for their benefit, but for my own freedom from resentment that would otherwise follow me across oceans. The garage had become, ironically, a space of profound transformation, the place where I had awakened to my worth and discovered the strength to claim it. Soon, I would leave both the garage and the family dynamics that had relegated me there, carrying forward not bitterness, but hard-earned wisdom about the price and value of authentic living. My final days in Colorado unfolded with unexpected developments as my family processed both my imminent departure and the new transparency between us. The morning after my father's revelation, I found my mother waiting for me in the kitchen, her eyes revealing a night of limited sleep and significant contemplation. "Your father told me about your conversation," she said without preamble, her fingers anxiously twisting her wedding ring, a nervous habit I'd observed throughout my childhood during moments of emotional distress. "I'm still processing everything," I replied, proceeding with my morning routine of preparing coffee, maintaining physical movement to counterbalance the emotional weight of the conversation ahead. "I owe you an apology," she continued, her voice steadier than I expected. "A significant one. I enabled a deception that fundamentally altered your life trajectory. While Robert's condition was his to disclose, I could have advocated for honesty, instead of participating in a charade that ultimately exploited your sense of responsibility." The directness of her acknowledgement caught me off guard. Throughout my childhood and adult life, My mother had consistently deflected accountability through emotional displays or vague references to her own struggles. This clear acceptance of responsibility represented a dramatic departure from established patterns. "Why didn't you?" I asked, turning to face her directly. "Why maintain the deception for over a decade while watching me postpone my own life to support everyone else's?" She exhaled slowly, seeming to gather courage for complete honesty. "Initially, it was about protection, both yours and ours. Your father's diagnosis devastated him. For a man whose identity was built around providing for his family, the progressive loss of capability struck at his core self-concept. Concealing his condition allowed him to maintain dignity while adapting to new limitations." She paused, visibly struggling with the next admission. "But over time, the deception became convenient. Your financial support alleviated pressures that would have required difficult adjustments. The mortgage we couldn't actually afford, Melissa's education expenses, the lifestyle that had become familiar. So it evolved from protection to exploitation," I summarized, keeping my tone neutral despite the surge of emotion her confirmation triggered. "That's accurate, though painfully blunt," she acknowledged. "The rationalization was always that it was temporary. That once your father's condition stabilized, or once Melissa completed her education, or once some undefined future point arrived, we would establish independence. But temporary arrangements became permanent structures, and truthful conversations grew increasingly difficult to initiate as the deception deepened." She reached across the counter, not quite touching me but bridging some of the distance between us. "I don't expect forgiveness, Hannah. What happened wasn't fair to you, regardless of the circumstances that initiated it. But I want you to know that your decision to establish boundaries has catalyzed necessary change for all of us." "What kind of change?" I asked, curious about her perspective on the family's path forward. "Your father and I are downsizing significantly. The house is under contract. A young family with 3 children is purchasing it. We've secured a 2-bedroom apartment in Bridgewater Complex that accommodates Robert's mobility needs while remaining affordable on our combined part-time incomes." I knew the complex she referenced, a modest but well-maintained community designed for active seniors, with accessibility features and significantly lower maintenance requirements than our current home. "Melissa has also made decisions," my mother continued. "She's transferring to the state university to complete her degree at lower cost and has secured a campus position in the admissions office that offers tuition reduction benefits. She's also moved Olivia out of your room, by the way. Your sister insisted that Olivia find alternative accommodations immediately after your conversation." These concrete steps toward financial independence, while prompted by necessity rather than choice, represented meaningful movement toward a healthier family system, one where adults assumed appropriate responsibility for their circumstances, rather than displacing that burden onto a single member. "These are positive developments," I acknowledged, "though I wish they hadn't required such extreme measures to initiate." "As do I," my mother admitted. "But sometimes transformation requires catalyst events that disrupt entrenched patterns. Your courage in establishing boundaries became that catalyst for our family." Her framing surprised me, characterizing my actions as courage rather than selfishness, as catalyst rather than abandonment. This perspective shift suggested genuine reflection rather than strategic manipulation to re-establish control. "There's something else I need to tell you," she continued, reaching into her pocket and withdrawing a folded document. "Something I should have shared years ago, which might have spared you some of the burden you've carried." I accepted the paper cautiously, unfolding it to reveal a bank statement from an account I didn't recognize, with my name listed alongside my mother's. "When your grandmother passed away 10 years ago, she left a modest inheritance designated specifically for you," my mother explained, her voice tight with evident shame. "$50,000 intended to fund your dreams, the sustainable architecture firm you had talked about starting, or perhaps that extended study program in Copenhagen you had researched. I stared at the statement, processing the implications. You never told me about this inheritance. No, she confirmed quietly. When it arrived, our financial situation was already precarious due to your father's condition and reduced income. I convinced myself that temporarily using the funds to stabilize our household was reasonable, that we would replace the money once circumstances improved, and then present it to you intact as intended. But circumstances never improved, I concluded, the familiar pattern evident even in this new revelation. They didn't, she agreed. The money was gradually depleted through family expenses. I maintained the account, documenting each withdrawal with the intention of eventual repayment. But that repayment never materialized. She gestured to the statement. The account currently contains $9,437, the portion we've managed to restore over the past 3 months since you announced your departure. It's nowhere near the original amount, but with the house sale completing next week, we'll transfer the remaining balance before you leave for Singapore. The revelation of this hidden inheritance, funds specifically designated for my ambitions that had instead been channeled into family expenses without my knowledge, might once have devastated me. Yet somehow, in the context of recent transparency and the impending clean break represented by my international relocation, it felt like the final piece of a puzzle I had been assembling unconsciously for years. I appreciate your honesty, I said finally, even if it arrives belatedly. There's no adequate apology for actions like these, my mother acknowledged. Words can't undo years of deception or restore opportunities lost. All I can offer is complete transparency now and commitment to rebuilding whatever relationship remains possible on fundamentally different terms. As I prepared to respond, movement at the kitchen doorway revealed Melissa, who had apparently overheard at least part of our conversation. You took Hannah's inheritance? She asked our mother, her expression revealing genuine shock, while simultaneously paying for my private university tuition and housing allowance? My mother flinched at the direct confrontation from her younger daughter, the one typically shielded from family financial realities. The situation was complicated, Melissa. It doesn't sound complicated, Melissa countered, entering the kitchen fully. It sounds like systematic exploitation justified through convenient rationalizations about family needs. The role reversal was striking, Melissa advocating for recognition of my mistreatment while our mother attempted to contextualize actions that, stripped of justification, appeared indefensible. You're right, our mother finally conceded, addressing both of us. When presented directly, the pattern becomes undeniable. We made choices that privileged certain family members' opportunities while sacrificing another's. Those choices, however, rationalized at the time, were fundamentally unfair. Melissa turned to me, her expression reflecting newfound understanding of our family dynamic. No wonder you're leaving. I'm surprised you didn't go years ago. Staying seemed like the responsible choice, I explained. Until I realized that true responsibility includes accountability to yourself and your own well-being, not just endless accommodation of others' needs. My sister nodded, then surprised me by addressing our mother with unprecedented assertiveness. I'm declining next semester's tuition payment. Whatever funds you've set aside for my education should go toward restoring Hannah's inheritance. Melissa, that's not necessary, I began, but she interrupted firmly. It is absolutely necessary, she insisted. It's the bare minimum of restitution for years of imbalance. I can manage my education through scholarships, employment, and loans, like most students. Hannah deserves to reclaim resources specifically designated for her future. The determination in her voice reflected not impulsive self-sacrifice, but considered ethical reasoning, a commitment to justice rather than perpetuation of inequity. In that moment, I glimpsed the mature adult my sister was becoming, someone capable of recognizing systemic unfairness and taking personal responsibility for addressing it. My mother seemed similarly struck by Melissa's stance, regarding her younger daughter with a mixture of surprise and something resembling respect. "If that's your decision, we'll honor it." "It is," Melissa confirmed. "And I'd like documentation of how Hannah's inheritance will be restored, similar to the repayment schedule Dad created for her financial contributions to the household." In the days that followed this conversation, remarkably concrete plans materialized for financial restitution. My father increased his hardware store hours to the maximum his condition permitted. My mother secured additional shifts at the library. The house sale proceeded smoothly, with closing scheduled for the day before my departure. Melissa not only declined tuition support, but also obtained a second campus position to increase her self-sufficiency. These practical adjustments, while significant, paled in comparison to the psychological transformation underway within our family system. Patterns established through years of secrecy and unbalanced expectations were being deliberately dismantled, replaced by emerging structures based on transparency, appropriate responsibility, and recognition of each member's inherent value beyond utility. On my final evening in Colorado, with suitcases packed and international arrangements confirmed, my family gathered for a farewell dinner unlike any previous gathering. Each person arrived with a symbolic gift representing not material value, but meaningful acknowledgement of my journey. My father presented architectural renderings he had commissioned from a colleague, conceptual designs for the sustainable housing development I had dreamed of creating years ago. "For when you're ready to pursue this vision," he explained, "whether in Singapore or elsewhere. Some dreams deserve restoration, not just replacement." My mother offered a handcrafted journal bound in leather, its cover embossed with the coordinates of significant global architectural sites. "To document your journey forward," she said simply. "Your story belongs to you alone." Melissa's gift proved most surprising, a framed photograph not of our family but of the garage that had served as my catalyst space. "To remember where clarity began," the inscription read. "Some discomfort illuminates paths to freedom that comfort conceals." As we shared our final meal together, conversation flowed with unprecedented authenticity. We discussed my father's condition openly, including management strategies and progression expectations. We acknowledged financial realities without minimization or deflection. We explored Melissa's educational path and emerging career interests, with genuine curiosity rather than prescribed expectations. Most significantly, we discussed my Singapore opportunity with collective excitement rather than veiled resentment, celebrating the international experience, professional advancement, and personal independence it represented. Family that had once viewed my success primarily as a resource to be shared, now recognized it as an achievement to be honored. Later that night, as I performed a final check of my emptied bedroom, I discovered an envelope tucked beneath my pillow. Inside was a bank statement for a newly established account in my name, containing $43,500, the majority of my grandmother's original inheritance, apparently restored through combined family resources, including proceeds from the home sale. Accompanying the statement was a simple note in my mother's handwriting. "Dreams deferred needn't be dreams denied. This belongs to you. No strings attached, no expectations implied. Build whatever future calls to your authentic self." The gesture, while unable to restore years of lost opportunity or heal all wounds created through deception, represented sincere commitment to relationship reconstruction based on respect rather than exploitation. It acknowledged both past wrongdoing and potential future connection founded on fundamentally different principles. As I boarded my flight to Singapore the following morning, I carried with me not just professional opportunities and personal aspirations, but also the profound understanding that true freedom emerges not from absence of connection, but from presence of boundaries, from relationships where authentic expression flourishes rather than conformity to external expectations. The garage that had initially symbolized my displacement had ultimately facilitated my liberation. In being relegated to that cold, concrete space, I had discovered the warmth of self-loyalty, the strength of boundary setting, and the transformative power of choosing oneself when others would not. Singapore awaited, not as escape, but as intentional. Next chapter, not as rejection of family, but as reclamation of self. The journey ahead would undoubtedly present its own challenges, but I would face them as a woman who understood her worth beyond utility, who recognized her right to self-determination, and who had learned perhaps the most valuable lesson of all, that the path to authentic living begins with the courage to claim the room your spirit requires, even when others would confine you to the garage. Landing at Singapore Changi Airport felt like stepping into another dimension. The pristine terminals with their lush indoor gardens, cascading waterfalls, and efficient systems stood in stark contrast to the emotional turbulence I'd left behind. As I navigated through immigration with my newly issued employment pass, a sense of lightness pervaded each step. The physical manifestation of psychological burdens lifted. My company had arranged temporary accommodation in a serviced apartment overlooking Marina Bay until I could secure permanent housing. When the driver pulled up to the gleaming high-rise, I experienced a momentary dissonance. Just 3 days earlier, I had been sleeping on a cot in a freezing garage. Now I stood before a luxury residence with 24-hour concierge service, infinity pool, and panoramic views of Singapore's iconic skyline. "Welcome to Sail Marina Bay, Ms. Wells," the concierge greeted me. "Your company coordinator called ahead. Everything has been prepared for your arrival." The apartment on the 32nd floor took my breath away, not just for its obvious luxury, but for what it represented. This space belonged unequivocally to me, arranged according to my preferences, funded by my accomplishments, designed to support my aspirations rather than accommodate others' needs. For the first time in 12 years, I occupied physical space that existed solely for my benefit. I walked directly to the floor-to-ceiling windows, gazing out at the illuminated skyline as evening descended. The iconic triple towers of Marina Bay Sands crowned with their aerial park, the futuristic structures of gardens by the bay with their giant mechanical supertrees, the Singapore Flyer observation wheel rotating slowly against the darkening sky, all emblems of innovation, intentional design, and forward momentum. "This is real," I whispered to myself, pressing my palm against the cool glass. "This is happening." After unpacking essentials and organizing my temporary home, I ventured onto the balcony, the tropical evening air wrapping around me like a warm embrace, despite December's calendar designation. 32 floors below, the city pulsed with energy. People, pursuing their individual journeys while collectively creating the vibrant ecosystem of one of the world's most dynamic urban centers. My phone chimed with an incoming text from Diane, my friend who had supported my decision to establish boundaries and pursue this international opportunity. "Landed safely? New life status update requested." I smiled, sending her a panoramic photo of the view with the caption, "From garage to this in 72 hours. Universe has range." Her response arrived immediately. "Spectacular. So much better than a garage with entitled house guests. Proud of you doesn't begin to cover it." The external validation felt welcome, but somehow secondary to the internal certainty that had solidified during my journey. For perhaps the first time, my decision stood on the foundation of self-respect rather than external approval, aligned with personal values rather than others' expectations. Sleep came easily that night, deep and restorative in the comfortable bed with its luxury linens, physical comfort harmonizing with psychological peace to create the most restful night I'd experienced in months. Morning arrived with golden sunlight, streaming through windows I'd intentionally left uncurtained, wanting to wake naturally to my new reality. After brewing coffee in the fully appointed kitchen, I established a small ritual, taking my first cup onto the balcony to greet the day, a quiet moment of gratitude before engaging with professional responsibilities. My official start date at the Singapore office wasn't for another 3 days, providing buffer time for adjustment to both time zone and new environment. This thoughtful scheduling, prioritizing human needs within professional expectations, further confirmed I had made the right choice in accepting this position. The company had arranged a welcome lunch with my new team that afternoon, an informal introduction before official duties commenced. As I prepared for this first professional engagement in my new context, I confronted the remnants of my old self-concept. The wardrobe I had transported internationally reflected the muted, practical aesthetic I had cultivated in Colorado. Clothes selected for durability and appropriateness rather than joy or self-expression. Standing before the closet, I made a spontaneous decision to visit the nearby shopping district before the lunch. It was time for external presentation to reflect internal transformation. Time for my professional appearance to embody the woman I was becoming rather than the role I had relinquished. 3 hours later, I entered the restaurant wearing a structured cobalt blue dress that complemented my coloring and projected confident authority, a deliberate departure from the neutral tones and conservative styles that had previously defined my work wardrobe. The subtle shift in self-presentation garnered immediate response from Margaret Chen, the regional director who had interviewed me via video conference months earlier. "Hannah Wells," she greeted me warmly. "You look even more confident in person than in our interviews. Singapore agrees with you already." "It does," I confirmed with genuine enthusiasm. "Everything feels aligned in a way I haven't experienced before." "That alignment will serve you well here," she observed astutely. "Our most successful team members are those who bring their authentic selves to the work rather than compartmentalizing professional and personal identities." The lunch introduced me to a diverse team representing 7 nationalities, various architectural specializations, and multiple career stages. Unlike my experience in Colorado, where hierarchy often determined conversational flow, this gathering featured dynamic exchange across position levels. Junior designers contributing ideas that senior architects considered with genuine interest. Administrative staff offering insights valued equally with technical expertise. "The Mekong Delta housing project launches next month," Margaret explained as we discussed upcoming priorities. "You'll lead the development team, overseeing design implementation that addresses both current needs and anticipated climate adaptation requirements." "I've been reviewing the preliminary assessments," I replied, pleased that my preparation was evident. The integration of traditional construction techniques with modern resilience standards presents fascinating challenges. "Exactly why we brought you on," Margaret confirmed. "Your background in sustainable development brings perspective we've been missing. Your approach to the Colorado Watershed Management Project particularly impressed us. The balance of environmental sensitivity with practical implementation." The reference to my previous work, specifically projects I had conceptualized and executed rather than my ability to manage budgets or accommodate organizational demands, signaled fundamental difference in how my value was being assessed in this new context. Here, contributions would be measured through innovation and impact rather than compliance and accommodation. As lunch concluded, team members dispersed with various expressions of welcome and offers of assistance with acclimation to Singapore life. Margaret remained behind, shifting our conversation from general introduction to more personal connection. "Transitions of this magnitude typically involve more than professional considerations," she observed. "How are you finding the personal adjustment to Singapore?" The question invited authentic response rather than polite assurance. Truthfully, the contrast between where I was just days ago and where I am now feels almost surreal, I admitted. I left behind complicated family dynamics that had constrained my choices for years. This move represents not just professional advancement, but personal liberation. Rather than dismissing this disclosure as inappropriately personal for professional context, Margaret nodded with evident understanding. International relocations often serve dual purposes, creating professional opportunities while facilitating personal reinvention. Those who thrive here tend to embrace both dimensions rather than compartmentalizing them. She continued thoughtfully. Singapore offers unique perspective on balancing individual autonomy with collective responsibility, a cultural framework that might prove healing after experiences where those boundaries became distorted. Her insight, acknowledging the potential therapeutic dimension of my geographical transition without invasive questioning about specific circumstances, demonstrated the emotional intelligence that characterized her leadership style. "I'm finding that already," I confirmed. "The clear expectations and mutual respect I've encountered here stand in striking contrast to the dynamics I left behind." Margaret smiled, recognizing the significance beneath my measured statement. "Well, we're delighted to have you join us. Your apartment arrangement is satisfactory." "More than satisfactory," I assured her, "though I'll begin looking for permanent housing soon." "Take your time with that decision," she advised. "Living locations in Singapore profoundly impact daily experience. Explore different neighborhoods before committing. The temporary arrangement is covered for 3 months precisely to allow thoughtful selection." This guidance, prioritizing informed personal choice over rushed decision-making, reinforced the value placed on well-being alongside productivity in this new professional context. As we parted, Margaret offered a final observation that resonated deeply. "Hannah, successful transitions require honoring both what we leave behind and what we move toward. The past that shaped you, both its challenges and gifts, remains valuable even as you create new narrative here. Integration, rather than rejection, often yields the most sustainable transformation." Her words accompanied me as I explored Singapore. That afternoon, wandering through the heritage district of Kampong Glam with its colorful shophouses and bustling Arab street. Then along the ultra-modern promenade at Marina Bay, where traditional bumboats navigated waterways alongside the city's futuristic architecture. The juxtaposition of historical elements with visionary development reflected Margaret's wisdom about integration. This was a culture that honored its foundations while boldly creating new possibilities, that maintained connection to origins while embracing transformation. That evening, I received an email from Melissa containing photographs of the family's move to their new apartment. The images revealed spaces significantly more modest than our previous home, but arranged with evident care. My father's reading, chair positioned near natural light, my mother's gardening books organized on purpose-built shelves, Melissa's art supplies arranged in a compact but functional corner studio. Her message acknowledged this transition without resentment. "Smaller, but actually feels more honest, aligned with our actual resources rather than artificial lifestyle maintained through your sacrifice. Dad seems relieved to have living space that accommodates his needs without pretense. Mom's actually engaging with budgeting rather than avoiding financial reality. And I'm discovering unexpected freedom in constraints. Creativity flourishes within authentic boundaries rather than false abundance." The maturity in her reflection suggested genuine growth, catalyzed by necessary adjustment rather than perfunctory adaptation to reduced circumstances. She concluded with unexpected insight. "I understand now why you needed both financial and geographical separation to establish genuine independence. Some patterns can only transform through complete disruption, rather than incremental modification. Your courage created opportunity for everyone's authentic recalibration." As I prepared for bed that night, gazing out at Singapore's illuminated skyline from my temporary home 32 floors above a city that represented both my present reality and future possibilities, I reflected on the parallel transformations unfolding across continents. My family reconstructing life aligned with actual resources and authentic needs, while I constructed new foundations based on self-respect and genuine value. The garage that had catalyzed this profound shift now existed only in memory and metaphor, the physical manifestation of displacement that had ultimately facilitated liberation for everyone involved. What had seemed like culminating injury in a pattern of exploitation had actually functioned as essential disruption of unsustainable dynamics, creating space for painful but necessary truth to emerge. Singapore's lights twinkled against the night sky, each illumination representing individual journeys within collective context. Millions of personal narratives unfolding simultaneously, intersecting through the intricate choreography of urban life. My story was now woven into this complex tapestry, not as escape from difficult past, but as intentional authorship of authentic future. The woman who had once accepted sleeping in a garage while financially supporting her entire family now stood at the threshold of expansive possibility, professionally, personally, geographically, and psychologically. The transformation hadn't required magic or miracle, just the courage to recognize my inherent worth and the determination to structure life in alignment with that recognition. As tropical breeze carried the fragrance of frangipani through my open balcony door, I embraced both the foreign beauty of my new environment and the familiar certainty of my reclaimed self-respect. The external circumstances had changed dramatically, but the most significant transformation had occurred internally, in the unshakable knowledge that I would never again allow myself to be relegated to any garage, literal or metaphorical. Tomorrow would bring new discoveries, challenges, and opportunities in this vibrant international context. I would face them not as the accommodating daughter and sister conditioned to prioritize others' needs, but as the confident professional and self-assured woman who had finally claimed her rightful place, not in a garage, but in the center of her own authentically designed life. The transformation that began in a cold garage had flourished into something I couldn't have imagined during those difficult days in Colorado. 6 months into my Singapore journey, I stood on the observation deck of Marina Bay Sands, gazing across the city I now called home. The April evening air carried the sweet, spicy scent of frangipani mingled with distant food stalls preparing dinner service. Below me stretched the impressive skyline, now familiar yet still awe-inspiring, a testament to what intentional vision and determined execution could create. "Quite a view for reflection," observed Margaret Chen, my director and mentor, who had joined me for what had become our monthly tradition, sunset reflections followed by dinner at one of Singapore's diverse culinary establishments. "It never loses its impact," I agreed. "Sometimes I still catch myself in moments of disbelief that this is actually my life now." Margaret smiled with understanding. The most profound transitions often retain that element of wonder, even as they become our new normal. It's a healthy tension. Integration without complacency. In the 6 months since my arrival, my professional trajectory had accelerated, beyond even my ambitious expectations. The Mekong Delta Housing Project had proceeded from concept to implementation phase under my leadership, earning recognition from both government partners and environmental organizations for its innovative approach to climate resilience. What had begun as management responsibility had evolved into genuine thought leadership as my design philosophy, prioritizing both ecological sensitivity and cultural appropriateness, gained traction across regional development initiatives. The Vietnamese environmental minister specifically requested your involvement in the Coastal Protection Initiative, Margaret noted, referencing our upcoming project expansion. Your reputation for balancing pragmatic implementation with genuine sustainability is spreading throughout the region. This external validation, while gratifying, seemed secondary to the internal satisfaction of finally applying my expertise to projects aligned with my deepest values. After years of corporate development work in Colorado that had prioritized profit margins over ecological impact, I was now creating solutions that honored both human needs and environmental imperatives. The expansion timeline looks ambitious, I acknowledged, having reviewed the preliminary schedule earlier that day, but the team we've assembled brings complementary strengths that should make it achievable. Speaking of teams, Margaret said, your leadership approach has not gone unnoticed. The collaborative environment you've fostered within your division represents exactly the organizational culture we aim to cultivate. What remained unspoken, but mutually understood, was how dramatically this professional recognition differed from my previous experience. In Colorado, my value had been measured primarily through accommodating organizational demands regardless of personal cost. Here, my contributions were evaluated through genuine impact and innovation rather than sacrifice or compliance. As we descended from the observation deck to continue our evening, Margaret steered our conversation toward personal dimensions. And beyond work? How are you finding life in Singapore at the 6-month mark? The question invited authentic reflection rather than polite assurance. It's been a journey of rediscovery, I replied thoughtfully. Learning to prioritize personal fulfillment alongside professional achievement still feels revolutionary sometimes. Indeed, the past months had introduced me to aspects of myself long suppressed under the weight of family obligation. I had discovered unexpected passion for urban photography, capturing the fascinating juxtaposition of Singapore's colonial heritage against its ultramodern development. I had joined a weekend hiking group that explored the city-state's surprisingly diverse natural reserves. I had even begun taking Mandarin lessons, embracing the challenge of language acquisition that connected me more deeply to local culture. And your housing situation? Satisfied with your choice? 2 months after arrival, I had purchased a condominium in Tiong Bahru, a heritage neighborhood that balanced historic architecture with contemporary amenities. The property represented significant investment, but one made with complete authority and aligned with my authentic preferences, rather than others' expectations. The Tiong Bahru decision was exactly right, I confirmed. The neighborhood's character resonates with me. The preservation of heritage alongside thoughtful innovation feels metaphorically aligned with my personal journey. My home had become a physical manifestation of emerging identity, designed entirely according to my aesthetic preferences with sustainable materials, efficient systems, and carefully curated art from local Singaporean creators. The space functioned not just as comfortable residence, but as tangible evidence of self-determination, each element selected through genuine choice rather than compromise or accommodation. As we settled into dinner at a restaurant specializing in Peranakan cuisine, the distinctive regional blend of Chinese, Malay, and Indonesian influences, Margaret raised the topic that had been circulating through office discussions in recent weeks. The firm is establishing a new sustainable development center next quarter, she explained, though I was already familiar with the initiative. The board is finalizing leadership appointments next week. She paused, allowing the implication to register organically rather than making explicit statement. The position would represent significant advancement, directing regional sustainability initiatives across Southeast Asia with substantial resource allocation authority and direct board accountability. That would be a remarkable opportunity for whoever receives the appointment, I observed neutrally, though internal excitement flickered at the possibility. Margaret's slight smile acknowledged my measured response. The selection committee has been particularly impressed by the Mekong project outcomes, especially the community engagement methodology you implemented. The decision isn't finalized, but preliminary discussions have been quite favorable to your candidacy. The potential advancement, arriving just 6 months into my Singapore tenure, would represent career acceleration beyond conventional timelines. Yet what struck me most profoundly was my response to this possibility. Neither desperate validation-seeking nor imposter syndrome denial, but balanced recognition of both the opportunity's significance and my genuine qualification for consideration. I appreciate the committee's consideration, I replied with authentic confidence. The center represents exactly the integration of ecological sensitivity and development pragmatism that drew me to this position initially. If selected, I would approach the responsibility with both enthusiasm and appropriate humility. Margaret nodded approvingly at this balanced response. That perspective exemplifies precisely why you're being seriously considered. Technical expertise without self-awareness creates problematic leadership. You've demonstrated both. As our conversation shifted to other topics throughout the evening, I reflected on how dramatically my professional identity had transformed, alongside personal development. The Hannah who had once derived value primarily through utility to others now recognized intrinsic worth independent of external service. The woman who had once accepted relegation to a garage while financially supporting an entire family now commanded professional respect through authentic contribution rather than sacrifice. Later that evening, I returned to my Tiong Bahru home, the warm glow of neighborhood shop houses illuminating historic facades against the night sky. My phone chimed with a notification, an email from my sister Melissa with the subject line, "Graduation. News." Opening the message revealed photographs of Melissa in cap and gown, proudly displaying her diploma, a bachelor's degree in graphic design completed through the state university program she had transferred to following my departure. The accompanying message detailed her journey with unexpected maturity. Officially graduated today, finished one semester early through extra courses and portfolio credits, working full-time at a small design studio while building freelance clients on evenings and weekends. The apartment is tiny but affordable on my actual income instead of inflated expectations. Mom and Dad attended the ceremony, Dad using his mobility scooter without embarrassment for the first time. Their apartment complex has become surprisingly appropriate for their needs. Mom's library position increased to full-time last month with benefits that provide better coverage for Dad's treatments. The update continued with remarkable self-awareness. Sometimes I think about how differently everything might have unfolded if you hadn't been relegated to that garage and finally stood up for yourself. We might all still be trapped in unsustainable patterns, me expecting endless support without developing self-sufficiency, Mom and Dad maintaining appearances beyond actual resources, you sacrificing authentic fulfillment to maintain everyone else's comfort. Your courage created necessary disruption that ultimately benefited everyone, though none of us could recognize it in the moment. She concluded with an invitation that would have seemed impossible during the painful period of my departure. I've been saving carefully and have accumulated enough for a 2-week visit to Singapore if the invitation still stands. No expectations about accommodations or expenses. I've researched affordable hostels and budgeted completely for my own. Costs. Just want to see your new life and reconnect as equals rather than within old dynamic. Let me know if this would be welcome. The message represented remarkable evolution in our sibling relationship. From entitled dependence to mutual respect, from assumed access to appropriate boundaries, from expectation to genuine connection. The sister who had once accepted my displaced status without question now recognized both the injustice of past arrangements and the potential for transformed relationship founded on equality rather than imbalanced obligation. I composed my reply carefully. Congratulations on your graduation and professional development. Your determination and self-sufficiency are truly impressive. I would absolutely welcome your visit whenever timing works for your schedule. My guest room is available, not from obligation but genuine desire to share my home with you. We can discuss details whenever you're ready to begin planning. As I prepared for bed that evening, I realized the approaching 6-month anniversary of my departure from Colorado represented not just chronological milestone, but profound transformation across multiple dimensions. Professionally, I had advanced from reliable team member to recognized thought leader, potentially on the cusp of directorial appointment that would influence sustainable development throughout Southeast Asia. Financially, I had progressed from supporting an entire family while deferring personal goals to establishing independent security while allocating resources according to authentic priorities. Relationally, I had evolved from enabler of dependency to cultivator of connections based on mutual respect rather than obligation. Psychologically, I had transformed from defining worth through utility to others to recognizing intrinsic value independent of external service. The journey that began in a cold garage had culminated not in bitter estrangement, but in healthier dynamics for everyone involved. My family developing appropriate self-sufficiency, while I cultivated authentic fulfillment. What had seemed like painful rupture had actually functioned as necessary catalyst for transformation that conventional approaches could never have facilitated. As tropical breeze carried night-blooming jasmine scent through my bedroom window, I reflected on the universal truth my experience had illuminated. Sometimes the most profound gift we can offer others is the courage to honor our own worth, even when that challenges established patterns. By refusing further relegation to literal or metaphorical garages, I had created space not just for personal liberation, but for collective evolution toward more sustainable and authentic living. The woman who had once accepted displacement as the price of family harmony now understood that true harmony emerges not from self-sacrifice, but from mutual respect, not from accommodation of imbalance, but from commitment to equity. What had begun as desperate boundary setting had blossomed into comprehensive transformation, creating space for previously unimagined possibilities across oceans and relationships. Tomorrow would bring new projects, challenges, and opportunities. In this vibrant international context that had become genuine home rather than mere escape, I would face them not as the accommodating daughter and sister conditioned to prioritize others' needs, but as the confident professional and self-assured woman who had finally claimed her rightful place in both career and life. Not in a garage, but at the center of her own authentically designed existence. 1 year to the day after being told to sleep in the garage, I stood addressing the International Sustainable Development Conference in Bangkok. The auditorium was filled with architects, urban planners, environmental scientists, and government officials from across Southeast Asia. As the newly appointed director of Singapore's Sustainable Development Center, I had been invited to deliver the keynote presentation on our innovative approach to climate-resilient housing in vulnerable coastal communities. Adaptation requires more than technical solutions, I explained, gesturing toward the detailed renderings projected behind me. It demands integration of cultural values, local knowledge systems, and community participation alongside engineering expertise. The most sustainable designs emerge when we prioritize both environmental resilience and human dignity. The audience's engaged response reflected recognition of an approach that transcended conventional development paradigms. What they couldn't know was how deeply personal this philosophy had become, how my own journey from displacement to self-determination had informed my understanding of the fundamental human need for dignified space. Following the presentation, I participated in a panel discussion with regional environmental ministers and development experts. When asked about the most significant challenges facing sustainable housing initiatives, I offered perspective that bridged professional expertise with personal insight. We often focus exclusively on external obstacles, limited funding, regulatory constraints, material shortages, I noted. But equally important are the internal barriers we bring to the work, assumptions about acceptable living conditions, unexamined biases about whose needs deserve prioritization, and tendency to replicate existing power imbalances within new structures. A Vietnamese environmental minister nodded approvingly. This perspective explains the distinctive success of your Mekong Delta approach. Your team consistently elevates considerations typically relegated to secondary status in development planning. The word relegated resonated with particular significance, though none present could appreciate its personal relevance. Being relegated to a garage had ultimately taught me the profound importance of spatial justice, of recognizing how physical environments either honor or diminish human dignity, either facilitate or restrict authentic development. After the conference concluded, I met with Margaret Chen, who had traveled from Singapore to observe the presentation and participate in subsequent planning sessions for our expanding regional initiatives. "Exceptional work," she commented as we settled at a riverside cafe overlooking Bangkok's bustling waterway transportation. The board members who attended were particularly impressed by how you translated complex technical considerations into accessible frameworks for non-specialist stakeholders. Thank you, I replied, accepting the validation without qualification or deflection. Another measure of personal growth from the woman who once minimized achievements to avoid appearing self-important. The interdisciplinary approach feels increasingly essential as projects grow more complex. Margaret nodded thoughtfully, which brings me to our next discussion. The Development Center's success has attracted significant attention. We've received funding inquiries from 3 international organizations interested in expanding our methodology to additional regions. She slid a folder across the table containing proposal summaries from development agencies in South America, West Africa, and the Pacific Islands, regions facing similar climate vulnerability challenges, but with distinctive cultural and environmental contexts. The board is considering establishing satellite centers in each region, she continued. They've asked me to discuss potential leadership structures with you before the formal planning phase begins next quarter. The opportunity presented transformative potential, both professionally and personally, expanding our sustainable development approach globally while creating leadership opportunities that would require assembling and mentoring specialized teams across diverse cultural contexts. This represents remarkable potential for impact, I observed, reviewing the preliminary materials with genuine enthusiasm. The methodologies we've developed in Southeast Asia offer valuable frameworks, though they would require thoughtful adaptation to each region's specific circumstances. Precisely why your leadership perspective is particularly valuable, Margaret affirmed. Your consistent emphasis on contextual appropriateness rather than standardized implementation distinguishes our approach from conventional development paradigms. As our discussion progressed into specific considerations for each potential regional initiative, I reflected on how profoundly my professional capacity had expanded in the year since leaving Colorado. The woman who had once suppressed innovative ideas to accommodate others' preferences now shaped international development approaches. The architect who had postponed creative aspirations to fund family needs now directed initiatives that transformed communities across multiple countries. That evening in my Bangkok hotel room, I received an unexpected video call request from my family in Colorado. Though we had maintained regular communication through Melissa's recent visit to Singapore and subsequent digital connections, unscheduled, contact remained unusual given time zone differences. When I accepted the call, the screen revealed my parents and sister gathered in their apartment living room, celebratory decorations visible in the background. "Surprise!" they exclaimed in unison, the camera panning to reveal a small cake with a single candle. My confusion must have been evident, as my father explained with uncharacteristic cheerfulness. "It's your 1-year garage anniversary, or more accurately, your liberation anniversary." I laughed in genuine surprise at the unexpected commemoration. "You're celebrating the day I was asked to move to the garage?" "We're celebrating the day that ultimately transformed everyone's lives for the better," my mother clarified, though none of us recognized it as such at the time. Melissa adjusted the camera to better include everyone in the frame. "We've been talking about how different things might be if that catalyst moment hadn't occurred, if you'd just continued accommodating increasingly unreasonable expectations without establishing boundaries." My father nodded, his expression reflecting hard-earned wisdom. "We might still be maintaining unsustainable appearances rather than living authentically within our actual resources. I might still be concealing my condition rather than addressing it openly. And I certainly wouldn't have developed actual self-sufficiency," Melissa added, "or recognized how entitled my perspective had become." The conversation reflected remarkable evolution in family dynamics, from defending unsustainable patterns to acknowledging how their disruption had ultimately benefited everyone involved. The crisis that had seemed catastrophic in the moment had actually initiated necessary transformation that more gradual approaches could never have facilitated. "We wanted to thank you," my mother continued, "not just for your years of support, but for having the courage to establish boundaries when they became necessary. That courage created opportunity for everyone's growth, though we couldn't recognize it initially." My father held up an envelope. "We've also completed restoration of your grandmother's inheritance. The final payment was transferred to your account this morning. The financial obligation has been fulfilled, though our moral responsibility to establish healthier relationships continues." This completed financial restitution, while significant, seemed almost secondary to the psychological restoration evidenced through their transformed perspective. The family that had once viewed my independence as betrayal now recognized it as necessary catalyst for collective evolution toward more sustainable and authentic living. After concluding the unexpected commemorative call, I stepped onto my hotel balcony overlooking Bangkok's illuminated skyline. The parallel between urban development and personal transformation struck me as particularly resonant, both requiring honest assessment of existing conditions, courageous dismantling of unsustainable structures, and intentional construction of alternatives aligned with fundamental values. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.